Morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. Welcome to the first ever community pod of the FPL Wire. Today, I'm joined by two Arsenal fans from our Discord who provide us with incredible insight on the Gunners every week. Sankalp and Achu, glad to have you on. How are you guys doing?
Hi, Saf. Doing so well. Good to see you after a long time, especially in a pod. I remember we connected like a season and a half ago. It was so good. FPL run after that. So I'm hoping for some similar luck this season, but fairly excited, especially as an Arsenal fan.
Yep, big things expected from you guys. And Achu, I'm disappointed you don't look like Robert Perez from your graph.
I don't look like my own self from the picture. It's been that long, but big fan of what you guys do at the Wire, and yeah, I'm a fan. So I've just been following you, like being a happy patron, and now can't wait to have this chat.
It's our absolute pleasure. So how did you guys get into FPL? What were your overall rank finishes last year? Let me ask you, Sankalp. Sankalp, I'll ask you first.
Yeah, I didn't have a great season last year. I think I closed around 670k.
But before that, you had, I think the previous year before that, right? You had a really good year.
Yeah, I ended with 355, first time top 500. And
See,
great
I wanted
season.
to mention that. Exactly. I wanted our viewers to know that.
Yeah, so I had a really good season that year. Ended top 500. I think I was in India 11th. So good season that year. And looking forward for a similar run, hopefully, this year.
And what about you, Achu?
I finished 610k. Started with Darwin and started well, but then made a few early transfers and was forced into a Gameweek 2 wildcard, believe it or not, after he got a red card in Gameweek 2. And yeah, did not go well last season. But the season before, I finished 35k and hoping to come back again this season.
Fantastic. So guys, these guys have sent me a lot of images. We're going to be looking at Arsenal's preseason, the previous season, the signings, and the prospects to come. I know you guys are all itching to hear about the possible Jesus replacements. We will cover that. But before that, let's get into our sponsor plugs and then we'll jump right in. The FPL Wire is a part of the Fantasy Football Scout Network, and from our inception, all the data you see on the pod is from the Fantasy Football Scout members area. The Scout are currently offering 30% off their regular membership price right now. Please sign up using the affiliate link in the description below. Right, guys. So the ball is in your court. I'm just listening. It's up to you guys to drive the discussion. Let's go.
So I thought we could maybe quickly just as an overview start with where Arsenal were last season in terms of just context setting. That's about it. Yeah. So maybe talk through where Arsenal were last season, how the team has changed, and where they are this season, and then maybe we can get down to what we can expect moving forward from an FPL standpoint. So this is Arsenal pretty much following a 4-3-3 structure, slide 1, where, which sort of moving on to the next slide, changes to a 4-2-4 in the first phase of build-up. So you're essentially looking at Xhaka dropping back into the double pivot and helping the first phase of build-up. And how that, moving on to the next slide, becomes a 3-2-5 in more settled possession. So this is generally the classic Arsenal template. And this has pretty much not changed in terms of the system and what Arsenal, through the game. What has changed perhaps over this structure is that fundamentally what we see is how this structure moves forward is Xhaka dropping deep, helping up the first phase of play, but then once the possession is more settled, you have Zinchenko who inverts into midfield and helps with the build-up. So it's usually Xhaka who falls deeper and helps out with the defensive phase of play, and then joins Odegaard once the attack flows and Arsenal create chances, from the other end.
Got it. Actually, the chat
Pankaj,
is
do you have
just
anything
saying,
to add?
sorry to interrupt you. The chat is just saying we have audio issues, might be caused by my Bluetooth device. I'm just going to switch to my wired headphones. Just give me a second, please.
Sure.
Does seem to be just one person. That might be fine, but let's just not take any chances, right? Sorry, go ahead, guys.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So we just spoke about the general Arsenal structure. What's the formation, how the first phase evolves and becomes a 3-2-5 in more settled possession, right?
Yeah.
But then within this, you have certain constants in terms of it's always Zinchenko who inverts, always Xhaka who's the deeper mid amongst the three in midfield, while Odegaard is placed as a slightly more advanced 8 on the right. And, you have Saka and Martinelli holding the way, with Jesus being the striker up front. Sankalp, you have anything to add here?
Yeah, not talking about formations, but when I think of last season, right, there are a lot of positives and a lot of pain associated with it. So purely as a fan, I think it was a great season for me. Felt like a fairy tale for most of it, right? Because I think it's been some time since you feel that an Arsenal team is going for the title, right? Even during the Leicester season, I know there were chances, there were opportunities, but you never felt this high. Right? So there was a lot of high as an Arsenal fan, which I absolutely enjoyed. And I thought it was a great season for us to join the Discord at the same time, because everyone used to come and ping us, say, hey, Sankal, what do you think? And like, okay, now you guys are thinking of Arsenal. You feel a lot more proud of the team overall. And I could connect a lot with the team as well, right? It was a young team, fast pacey. I think we played a lot of good football as well, right? Like you talked about, good variations across the pitch, right? A lot of combinations were there. I thought White and Saka built very strong partnership as the season went ahead, right? I could not see it at the start of the season, but as the season went ahead, I thought these two combined really well. Odegaard had such a lovely season. Looking at a midfielder without penalties scoring 15 goals, it reminded me of Lampard's season, right? I know Zoff will remember those days, right? So a lot of positives, and the fact that we got in two players from City, right, who they were not utilizing, Jesus and Zinchenko, and we utilized them so beautifully. Overall, I think a lot of positives, but at the same time, I think as we get on to this pod, we'll also speak a bit about perhaps why we fell short and how we can go ahead from here, what Arteta is trying to do, and what our next ambitions.
Right. Let's look forward now.
Right. So, because before we get into the summer transfers and how we are building the team, we wanted to talk about where we we feel, what are some of the things that might have caused a bit of issues, right? One of the primary advantages that Arteta and Arsenal had last season was a lot of overloads that we created on the attacking areas, right? Be it on the right with Odegaard moving there, or the left with, Xhaka, Zinchenko, as well as Martinelli on the left side, and Jesus sometimes drifting with that side, right? So these overloads really helped us on the attacking side. We moved out from a 60 plus goal team to 80, 85 odd goals, right? 88 goals, right? I think it was a record for Arsenal in 20 plus years, and it really helped us in the attack. But at the same time, I think overall, as the season progressed, right, most opposition started realizing that there are some weaknesses, there are some areas that we could attack Arsenal with. We got hit a lot on transitions, and if you look at this match, this is the Europa League match, which got us out against Sporting, and you can see that the clubs were targeting the left back, the full back areas, right? So Zinchenko was inverting, so you see a lot of balls going towards the left wing, and we also had White, who was fairly advanced, and that meant that we had a lot of balls towards his area as well. At the same time, I think one topic which was fairly strongly discussed by Arsenal fans as well as opposition fans was depth. Right, the lack of depth. I think it really hurt us. We had Gabriel Jesus being injured during the World Cup. We had Saliba going out, which was fairly, I think, influential in how we were trying to play. Right, and these are some of the things that comes to my mind which really affected us. And also in some games, I thought we lacked strong physicality in certain areas, which I think we are going to address now with this kind of summer signings we have gotten, right? Anything that comes to your mind, Suresh, when you think of last season, where do you think we failed?
I think last season was about, with the new summer signings with Saliba, who was again for the first time in the 11. It was about establishing a set style of play without Oba, sort of moving away from the old guard, Lacazette, and so on. It was establishing how do you set habits within the team and set principles of play moving forward. What caught up in the end was, again, like you said, of course, after a certain point in time, even though the squad was fairly rotated in the Europa League, we just ran out of steam, right? And what we lacked was just depth, but also just how certain. Of course, if you're just talking through the back line, it was always Zinchenko who inverted. It was never. So it was either Zinchenko or bust, because White was always like a wide centre back, and Zinchenko inverts. It's always Xhaka who's the deepest amongst the front eights. And with Jesus, you had a bit of rotations, and Xhaka being the one on the right. We did not really have a backup for Odegaard or Xhaka, and just happened that they did not get injured, but then the other chances sort of caught up. So I'm just read out something which was asked at the close season, where there was an interview where Arteta was asked that you speak about great players and trying to improve. A lot of young talent are committing their futures to Arsenal. You will have to say a few goodbyes, but that will be hard but necessary. Xhaka, for example, and strengthen the squad further. Has the planning for next season already started in that? For which Arteta basically said, yes, and the first plan is to look at the mirror, look at myself, and ask, what can I do better? Have I got enough from the squad currently? We've got some really good things. I look at my squad, and we have some really good players, but I don't know where the ceiling is. So we seek for that, and what we do not have in certain areas that's needed to win, we need to recruit that. It's just as simple as that. When we move across and we see what have we missed, of course there is depth. Therefore, what can we add to make plan A better, which has been developed across the year. But as well, if you look at other options, right? You look at let's say away performances at tough grounds like Anfield, for example. Arsenal got into a position where they're playing their football. They played well and they sort of got ahead in the game. But what they could not sustain, or they did not have an answer for, was when the crowd is against you, when there's pressure against you, how do you see off those moments? So it was same at West Ham, and that's one aspect that we have had to address. But not just that, but let's also look at, say, a different type of problem. Brighton at home, City away, where Arsenal was pretty much man marked out of the park, right? And that's a way where our front four, as good as they are and as many rotations as they have, the tallest amongst the four front players is Odegaard at 5'10". So this time what we've done is maybe added another out ball, in terms of a long ball, having a target man up front to Havertz, to probably have an alternative to that. Because what we're seeing increasingly in the Premier League is whether you have the best players or not, you're starting to see your level of coaching being challenged. And with De Zerbi, with the new Bournemouth coach, with Postecoglou, with Pep, everyone, you've got to have solutions. You've got to have in-game tweaks that you can make without taking up substitutions, and how you can have answers to different situations on the pitch. So I think Rice is one such a signing. Of course, we're going to talk about different signings, but fundamentally, I think Rice has been a signing that Arsenal fans in general have been crying out for a long time, right? So Declan Rice definitely gives you, in a tough away ground, let's say, talk about St. James's Park, for example, where you need to just see a game out, defend for your life, and, see through phases where you are going to come under pressure. You can't just play a football the whole time. So that is something. Now with Timber, we have somebody who can invert from the right if required, from right back. Of course, he's played centre back at Ajax, but he can play from the right and invert from right back. So it's not really Zinchenko or bust when it comes to a certain style of play. We're also looking at Havertz, who is a topic we're going to dive deeper into later in the podcast, but essentially somebody who gives you optionality on the pitch. Let's say with Odegaard, instead of Odegaard, maybe perhaps playing through the middle. We'll discuss that. But he's someone who makes your plan A better. So
I
these
like
are
that we're
things that we
discussing hours, in place of in front of Zoff, and I find it really funny because I know Zoff has seen him, right? Would have hoped about his potential, etc. And I think it's a very interesting case, right?
Yeah. Like I said in the chat, right? It's like telling me how sexy my ex-girlfriend is. Fair enough.
Oh, we'll tell you, man. Don't worry.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think it was a very good quote by Arteta, because I feel there's a lot of sync into what we have tried to do in this summer transfer window, right? We have done our signings mostly early. I think there's one signing which we are going to do. There's a lot of noise around Raya's transfer, right? But what we have done is got Kai in, right? We were talking about getting a bit more physical. I know people don't associate Kai Havertz with being physical, but he wins a lot of aerial duels. And I think that was also one of the weaker points for Arsenal last season, where people kept pointing out fingers to Ramsdale, but it's just not the goalkeeper who's hitting the balls, right? It's also the receiver, right? And we have Jesus, Saka, and Martinelli, who are not generally the strongest players when it comes to receiving aerial balls, right? So Kai Havertz feels like a very good addition when it comes to that front, right? And especially now I think one of the other weaknesses that I felt, looking back at that point of time, I was just not thinking of these things. But now looking back, I feel one of the weaknesses that we have, or plan B, like Arteta is calling it out, is the fast breaks, the counterattacks, right? We had, I think, only 4 goals last season from counterattacks, from fast breaks. We were 14th when it comes to shots created from counter-attacking situations. Even City had double the goals as well as double the shots when it comes to fast breaks, right? And obviously teams like United were at the top when it comes to goals created, right? So these are the kind of situations that we have to be ready with, right? For example, City is coming and dominating you, right? You need to be able to create that kind of alternative for yourself if you're at Anfield away. and at some point of time the crowd goes against you. It's not just the mentality, but also the skill set that we can add, which can bring out that plan B for us. And I think Kai Havertz feels like a great addition with respect to the plan B, right? We'll obviously talk a bit more in detail about Kai, with what all he can do and whether we'll be able to utilize Kai to our best, because utilizing Kai is a different ballgame altogether, because Chelsea had great coaches, right? They had Tuchel, they had Potter, who is not a bad coach, irrespective of how the result came out to be. But using him is a different ballgame altogether. And when we're talking about physicality, I also want to mention the golden boy Timber. I'm so happy with this transfer signing. I cannot tell you how happy I am. I know Declan Rice came out as a record-breaking transfer signing, but it was the Timber signing that really made me smile, because it really changes the dynamics at the left side for us, right? Because Zinchenko, while is the ultimate passer, I've never seen a guy in that profile passing the ball something like this. His movements, his passes, completely different. But at the same time, you need to add a certain bit of physicality, because like we're seeing, a lot of teams actually countered us from the wings, right? And we saw Zinchenko lose out on a lot of duels as well, right? And Timber feels like the ideal mix of both, right? He's like the ideal mix of your Zinchenko as well as Tierney. We were expecting to see him on the right, but the preseason games, I think, gave us some view as to how Arteta looks to use him, and things can look really interesting with these kind of signings. Right?
Yeah. What I'm really jealous about is what Mourinho used to talk about. You guys have made signings that strengthen the first team. You guys have got depth also, but all of these guys, you could argue, could be a part of Arsenal's first 11 as well. So I think in terms of recruitment, you guys had a fantastic window. And the counter-attack stat, I didn't know about. I wouldn't have guessed it when you have your pacey guys like your Martinelli, Saka, even Jesus leading the line. That stat really surprised me, and I'm sure it will for a lot of our viewers as well. Let's talk more about the detail about the signing. We've spoken about Kai. You've got his numbers up over here. We'll talk more in detail when we get over there. And let's talk. Tell me more about Rice. Your thoughts there.
So Rice, I think that the part. I mean, I think here what we're trying to do is also be cognizant that I think LR has a famous quote where he says, "Beware of a fan." Right? It's not that we're trying to like not pass on the accurate information, but then there's always an inherent attachment from a fan, which either makes him understate something or overstate something. Right? But just looking at Declan Rice, I mean, I think the thing about his profile is, of course, his core skill set of what he's good at is exactly what Arsenal wants in terms of him being, a far superior defensive midfielder than anybody else we have on the squad, even compared to Saka, right? So in terms of his recoveries, in terms of his ball-winning ability, in terms of his reading of how the opponent's attacks evolve, I think he's just above anybody else that we've had at Arsenal for a really long time. So that is something that is going to really stand out. And if you speak to a lot of West Ham fans, one thing that you also understand about Declan Rice is that they believe that he has a few more years left in his team. They believe that because of the circumstantial way that of the kind of coaches sometimes that he's played under at club and country level, he's not maybe explored a side to his game that he can still improve. So that is something that will be interesting, how he integrates and tries to, maybe understand how moving forward, how his game could evolve. In fact, in the latest friendly against Monaco, he did play the attacking 8. So that is something that, instead of Saka or instead of Partey, I think we might increasingly come to see him, especially in games where there is a higher level of transition control required. So there could be teams that are sitting back against Arsenal, but then have a quality to break, like United, where there was a friendly where Declan Rice played. While we're on this topic, I think there's one thing that I also want to touch on is if there is a side to his game that I think he can improve, I think it's definitely how he progresses play in the first phase of attacks. So his passing is good, his assist and creating is good once you're in the middle third or the final third of play. But then when you're talking about passing through the lines, breaking lines, and verticality in terms of building up attacks, from a deeper position, that's an area that Declan sometimes is a bit more conservative in the way his game is. Perhaps it is defense first, perhaps it is possession first when he plays at England and West Ham. But that is something that he'd have to work on, especially if he's playing the 6. When he's playing the 8, he's slightly more advanced. I think it's different, but that's one area where I felt that perhaps he could do better.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
I'm not sure exactly, how to put Declan Rice into a team, right? You know that he brings in immense quality as a player, but he's also a player who has been exposed to a completely different kind of football, right? He used to play in a different part of the pitch altogether, right? And while a lot of people expect him to come into the first side right from day one, right? I'm a bit skeptical looking at the preseason matches. I do feel that there's a chance that he gets slowly integrated into the squad.
That's a big statement, bro. You don't like that. I like it.
I know, because people are expecting him to take that party role immediately, but that Thomas Partey role is not easy to take, right? And the good thing is Thomas Partey also has come into the preseason really strong, right? He has brought his A game so far. That should make Arteta think that whether I should put him directly into the pitch or whether I should give him some time, because we have 2-3 weeks there, right? And the good part about our fixtures is, and we are going to discuss our fixtures because at the end of the day, it's a FPL pod, right? Is we have 3 home games against relatively easier opponent, right? In the first 4, right? And ideally, I feel this gives us some opportunity to help out these players to settle in, because that number 8 person can be played both by Declan Rice as well as Kai Havertz, right? It depends on how we want to use them, right? I thought he played well with Martinelli, and that partnership is something you want to see, right? Because they are 2 fairly young players and fairly celebrated players, right? Martinelli is a player who's now FPL darling, but looking at his ownership, maybe not so much. And Declan Rice, obviously, we have brought him in with so much fanfare. It will be interesting to see how these 2 integrate if Declan Rice picks up those positions. But at the same time, I think it brings me to one thing in my mind is this season we are trying to transition from a second place team to a first place team. And thanks to City being City for the last 5-6 seasons, the gap is not a small one, right? Generally, the gap is smaller when you look at any other league, but in this league, the gap is a big one. And we are expecting Arteta to do similar things, right? Maybe play the same set of players, play them 80-85 minutes. I think this season can be fairly different in how Arteta approaches as well. And preseason has given us some flavor. He has tried out a lot of things. When we get into preseason and look at it in detail, we'll see that there are a lot of different formations. He's tried to build up the ball with 14 different kind of players, right? 14 different kind of pivots. So you have 28 side of players, right? So he's trying out different stuff, primarily because he understands there's a long season ahead. This season, we have a high target, right? We didn't start last season with the aim of winning the league, but we are doing it this season, right? There's no escaping it. So there will be a lot of rotations. There will be a lot of changes. Kai Havertz has come in with a 65 million transfer fee. It's not a cheap transfer fee either. But at the end of the day, there will be some player who will be on bench, right? Be it Kai, be it Declan Rice, be it Thomas Partey. And we just have to accept it. It's just not an indicator of the quality, but it is more an indicator of how we want to resolve some problems on the pitch, which our opponents are creating for us.
Great analysis there. This is the numbers you've got up here for Timber. Anything you'd like to highlight?
I think we have discussed a bit about Timber, but looking at the preseason matches, I'm fairly happy to see him being tried as a left back, because all of us expected him to come in as a right back, right? Purely FPL wise, this gives a bit more surety to us for the fullbacks, right? Ideally, I think for the next 3-4 matches, we can see a lot more of White Timber fullback pairing, right? And for people who are looking at an early wildcard, this gives us an additional opportunity to get into Arsenal defense, right? So things are interesting. I like the physicality which I'm seeing, because I saw the Barcelona match and he got into a lot of physical duels with Rafinha and he was winning most of them. That made me smile. Like, okay, this guy has something in him apart from just, passing the ball, right? So good stuff so far. And his metrics indicate his qualities, right? With the ball, at least, he can keep the ball, he can pass it, he can run with the ball. His carries are really
These
strong.
look like a
So
midfielder's numbers. They don't look like a fullback's numbers at all.
exactly, right. So these are good, strong skill sets that we have added to a different part of the pitch, which we may not have had before. And it will be interesting to see how he starts displaying it in the Premier League because the league is now different.
Right. Let's jump into some of the preseason matches. You can see how Arsenal set up in the various ways. So this is the first one. Which one is this? You guys will have to tell me.
Yeah, this is the one where Arsenal started out the preseason against Nuremberg, where again we're seeing a pretty much 3-2 build up in settled possession with the same positions, the two wide players and the striker with the two aides sort of being the front five who attack. In this instance, we saw Kivior inverting from left back. We saw this, I think, briefly at the end of last season, where we saw Kivior inverting. But that is just to show that how this is the first time we saw Trossard playing the left eight. This is the first time we saw that, and as we move through the next slides, we'll understand why he's sort of been persisted with at the left eight by Arteta, as opposed to Kai, who we thought was eventually going to replace Xhaka in the 11. And what are the qualities which makes Trossard more suitable compared to, let's say, Kai, at least positionally playing as a left eight in build-up. But otherwise, this is pretty standard in terms of going with the 4-3-3, where Trossard in the first phase was actually dropping deeper alongside Partey as a 4-2-4 that we saw in the last season section, where that was what was helping Arsenal progress play. So if we can move on to the next one.
Sure.
So here, this was an interesting game, to be honest. And this is the first time we saw Havertz start. And this was the position that Havertz took up on the pitch, where a lopsided box. So it was not a diamond. So pretty much, Rice started as the left eight. Rice started as the number 6, and Havertz and Odegaard started as the advanced 8. But Havertz positionally was further advanced than Odegaard. So this is what we were trying to see, where this is the first game where Timber started from the right and he inverted. So instead of having only Zinchenko who could invert from the left back, there were certain tweaks within the same overall structure, where Timber was inverting from right back, and instead of the left eight being the one, Xhaka dropping deep, the first time we saw Odegaard play in a slightly more withdrawn role. And Havertz played the advanced eight, and we had certain situations in last season, if you remember, where Rice would be the one overlapping Saka. Now we had Tierney who could do that just because of the optionality of having Timber. So it's not always, Ben White who needs to overlap. But this was interesting to see how Kai, we'll see through other games, but how Kai is not really being used the way he was used in the recent past at Chelsea.
Absolutely. I don't think we ever got to see the best of Kai in the right positions. I think he was moved around so much. One thing I'm quite clear on, center forward, at least being used as a target man as we try to use him, is probably not his best profile. Sankar, please go ahead.
Yeah, looking at this game, right, FPL wise, I'm a bit interested to see Tierney or Timber taking up that overlapping, fullback role, because we have seen Martinelli play a lot wide, right? And his strength is the one-on-ones that he gets into, right? Because of the fact that he's a bit wider from the goal, right? It takes him some time to get into the goal. Obviously, he gets past one or two defenders, and he still manages to get into the box a lot, right? If we give him an opportunity where we have someone strong like Timber or even a rejuvenated Tierney, I think Martinelli can pick up that additional notch even that we expect him to do at some point of time, right? So this is something that I want to keep in my mind. I remember when I was seeing this game, I like, okay, keep this in your mind. If there is an overlapping fullback with Martinelli, you need to remember Martinelli. Don't forget him.
We move on to the next game.
Moving on. Yeah. So this was the way Arsenal set up against. This is the Barcelona lineup where Arsenal went again with a 2-3-5 this time, but both the fullbacks did not really invert. They stayed out wide, and this was the first time Arteta tried Timber at left back primarily and kept both White and Timber wide, just with a view of helping with transitions. And because Barca is very, very pacey with Dembele, and I think Ansu Fati played that game. And instead of inverting, he wanted to have them wide, where Timber again is going back to his quality, where he's very comfortable on the ball and very good with build up, but he's great in the duels. He's great 1v1. Heading is something that he's probably not as good, but he was really good. I mean, especially with Rafinha, how people generally tend to double up on him and so on. But this was something that in the defensive saves was really helpful, especially having Timber play against Rafinha. And so what was more interesting with this game was how our front five played. So basically Trossard started on the left and Havertz started as the 8. But if you move on to the next slide, one thing that we would see is when Arsenal had possession, Trossard would again drop deeper into the deeper 8 position alongside Partey, help progress possession, and whatever the space was vacated by Trossard, Havertz would attack that. So one thing that was becoming clearer was if you want to have and play with 2 advanced 8s or 2 10s in the midfield 3, I think it was you can only do that if both the advanced 8s are as stress resistant as they come. And Havertz is great, but Havertz's best quality is how he anticipates the next move, how he attacks spaces. He's not someone who drops deeper. He does press, but he presses high. He presses like a second striker. He does not defend like a midfielder. He does not defend spaces. He does not defend large spaces in midfield like a Xhaka would. And though Trossard is not a great volume, does not have great volume in terms of his passing and in terms of setting the tempo for a game, he's great he's incredibly press resistant. So it's a bit like Cazorla. He doesn't have the same passing ability as Cazorla, but in terms of being able to play in the front 3, but also being press resistant when having to play in midfield, Trossard is someone who could do that and help progress play ahead of the pitch. So this was an interesting tweak that Arteta did, where for the first time it felt like Havertz could play as an 8, but not really be found out in terms of losing the ball and being exposed as a result.
He's been trying a lot of different things, and we'll talk about that once we are done with. That's quite interesting.
Yeah. I think one thing that I kept noting over the preseason is how much fresher Bukayo Saka looks, right? And the fact that we have so much more transitions on the left side also means that Bukayo Saka was left free for a lot of the time, right? The team kept pressing, compressing the pitch on the left side of things, which left Bukayo Saka free. And I saw a lot of transitions from Ramsdale directly to Saka, from Partey directly to Saka, right? So it is going to be interesting a bit because we are going to discuss a lot on Saka, right? I think there's a lot of debate on whether he can recreate the kind of stats that he had last year. I feel he will have more support from the opposite wing looking at the preseason now. And there will be a bit more variability into how we are going to create, right? And I think that will help wingers, both Saka as well as Martinelli, because it's not only going to go from the right side, which was happening a lot last season.
Move on to the next game.
Yeah. So this was the United Arsenal game. and that Arsenal lost 2-0. So in this game, we actually tried to invert from the right, but where without White playing, Gabriel was the one who, starting out with the back three in possession, like in build-up, Gabriel was the center of the back three. And this is the game, if you remember, where he just missed a clearance and Sancho would break through on goal and score. So though your idea is, this is where you know that you're sort of addressing problems in the squad and getting the right qualities in, but then only when you apply certain principles and say, okay, you can invert from the right or left, you could do that, but you also understand who can play center of the centre back of the back three and who cannot. So Saliba, and not just that particular instance, the way he commanded the back line, the way he how calm he is in the ball in terms of building up play and so on, you could just see that Gabriel and Saliba is just that much better. So in terms of how he passes out of the back under pressure and so on, that was something that was noticeable in this game. In addition to which, Rice did play this game where you just start seeing a correlation where in games where there is high potential for counter-attacks, Arteta is starting to pick Rice, because that is something where, especially with Timber, who is I'd say he's as fluid as a Zinchenko. How, you remember how Zinchenko inverting, he'd sometimes be seeing on the right flank, in terms of build-up. Exactly the same. I think he has a very intuitive understanding of where he's required while inverting. And to have someone like Rice alongside a fullback who plays like that, I think is, a great asset because of his defensive understanding of the game. So it did not work out. This game, Arsenal did lose the game, but then in terms of on the balance of chances, I think Arsenal still created, so it was not really like, United putting up really, solid performance in terms of their defense. But again, these are things that you just understand while you implement them, during preseason, right? So that was something that was evident.
Sanki, anything to add?
Nothing much. I think Achu covered it well. More or less, it was fairly similar to the Barcelona match with different, transitions. The only thing is we saw Martinelli pair up a bit with Havertz, which was the first time we saw it. And Martinelli did something similar that Trossard did in the match later, right? He was falling in deep a bit and Havertz was taking in those vertical runs a lot, right? So that again keeps you thinking, right? Because we see a lot of stats with Martinelli with Jesus, Martinelli with Trossard, Martinelli with Eddie, right? I think we'll start adding columns to it, Martinelli with Rice, Martinelli with Havertz. And there are going to be variations to it and we'll have to start taking note of it.
Absolutely spot on.
Moving on.
Yes.
So this is the last friendly that Arsenal played with after the Jesus news came out. So this is the game against Monaco at the Emirates that happened day before yesterday. And for the first time, what you saw was like a Partey Rice pivot, and with Eddie playing up front. So this is something that, again, Arsenal had less fluidity in attack as a result of Eddie coming in, who's more of a regular central striker, right? He does not have as many rotations in offensive phases, let's say with a Martinelli or even with a Havertz or the left-sided 8, who, runs into the space that he vacates. So that is something that even when there was a flurry of substitutions after the hour mark, Nketiah stayed on. So that is something that even though Havertz, you had Balogun, I think he's been training. With the conjunction of that news with Balogun not training with the squad, as well as Trossard, being preferred in a slightly more deeper role when possible. It makes you think whether, because when Xhaka was part of the squad and in terms of just pecking order, I would have said on the balance of what happened last season, I would say Jesus is definitely number one. In the absence of Jesus, Trossard is the false nine or the nine who would be preferred, right? But with Chaka not playing now, it just makes you wonder if, because Havertz hasn't really settled in as the LCM, as the advanced 8 in midfield, maybe Trossard is required more there, and therefore, as a result, perhaps Eddie might be favored more to start instead of Jesus. This is what I took away from this team. But other than that, I could find, of course, the Arsenal are an attacking team, and once the first choice attack came through in terms of Odegaard, Saka, all subbing in for these players after the hour mark, we did have more of the ball, more control, and so on. But in terms of how Arsenal build up with Jesus, you always find that the Martinelli role and the Havertz role are the more productive areas where the chances fall, right? But when it comes to Eddie, he takes away more of the chances in terms of being at the end of them. His finishing is not the best, but in terms of just pure FPL understanding, I think he is someone that could be the João Pedro that we've all been expecting.
Yep. LR's ears probably pricked up because we had a big thing for Necktie last year, and always the XG numbers were through the roof, right? Like you said, it's the finishing that let him down. Sankalp, who do you think is going to play up top?
I'm still a bit dicey because I thought Eddie did a really, really good job. I didn't think he was static. He was playing across the pitch. He was dropping in deep a lot, helping in the build-up. He connected well with Martinelli because I thought Martinelli had at least a couple of opportunities where he could score, and it all came via Eddie. So I have a bit of doubt about that relationship because we are basing it on that 4 or 5 matches that we saw last season. Some of which was against Tottenham Hotspurs away, United at home, City at home, right? So really tough matches. So I don't want to look at stats and just take a conclusion there. But overall, I felt Eddie played well. But purely from a team dynamics point of view, we tried something different here. Havertz came in as a number 8 role. Here, Rice came into that number 8 role, right? And overall, I feel I agree with Suresh a bit where I say there is going to be slight change in how well we play from here on, at least for the first 4-5 weeks, right? I don't expect Arsenal to be a 3+ XG side with or without Jesus even, right? Because I think we are trying out a lot of things. We have both Rice and Havertz were getting adjusted to a new style, to a new role, right? The entire team dynamics looks a bit shaken, and that's the reason I feel, we are going to talk about our defense, we are going to talk about attack, but it might not be as elite today as it was towards the end or mid of last season, right? It's something that I want to emphasize for people who expect maybe the roof from our players, right? This is a team which has made plenty of changes. There is going to be some price of, adoption of these changes, right? The only good thing for me here is the fixtures. The first 3, right, makes you feel like, hey, hopefully by the end of those 3 weeks, we would have adopted. And at the same time, I hope we don't pay any price for it. But I don't expect these to be 3+, 4+, 5+ games in, week in, week out. Maybe 1 week we do that, but I think there will be some time for the entire thing to gel. Beat Eddie, beat Trossard. Who starts next week? It's a bit difficult to say because while Eddie did a really, really good job, we also did not have a lot of first-team players playing, right? We had Vieira who came in, right? We had Tomiyasu who was playing. So a lot of changes were done. We had Kure who was playing at the back, right? So it is possible that in the Community Shield day after tomorrow, we see Trossard playing there. But a simple observation is whenever Eddie has played in the preseason, he has played as a number 9, right? And maximum amount of opportunities that Trossard has got, scored, and is in form in has been on that left wing position, right? So it does create a bit of doubt in you. My thought is that when we get into the Community Shield final, we will see what Arteta expects to be the squad for game week 1 as well, right? Because Jesus is now injured. And that's the reason I'm holding back a bit. My gut says it's still going to be Trossard, but I'm not as certain as you can be.
Got it. Let's talk a little bit about Havertz, even though I don't really want to, but Ella's insisted that we do. And you guys have sent me some material. I'm not even going to try to pronounce this. You guys have to tell me to Romditer, or what was it? You guys have to tell me.
This is an
Romdeuter.
Romdeuter.
This is how we are trying to tell ourselves, yes, it will work.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, I think so. Just to touch on this, I think Havertz has. I think you've got to understand how the Havertz transfer even happened, right? I think Arteta pushed really hard for that, and I think in terms of going ahead and making that amount of investment where you had more obvious areas on the pitch to sort of address, I think speaks to how much Arteta was behind the transfer and wanted to get Kai in prior to early in the transfer window, right? So just to, I think just to set the ground here, this is by a criminally underfollowed account called Harvey Gratian on YouTube, who does amazing Arsenal tactical content on YouTube, and a lot of what we've used today is from there. So we link the video that he's done specifically on Kai down on the video down here, and I think you should definitely check him out. Specifically on Kai, I think Kai is a very misunderstood player, right, across the pitch, and this, I think, in a way is what Kai is. So I'm going to pronounce this. Attempt to pronounce this. It's called Romdeuter, where a Romdeuter or a space interpreter is a role in which the player has two main objectives. First, find the space in the opposition's defense. Second, exploit that space. So the player does not occupy a fixed role or a space. His position on the pitch is determined by where the space is. One thing is for sure is most of his play occurs in the attacking third of the pitch. So the first thing just maybe comes that should could explain in this his role is maybe think Thomas Muller, someone who operates between the lines, someone who does not have a rigid fixed role. He's not really he might be a 10, but he does not really play like a 10. Doesn't get on the ball enough, but he always finds where the gaps are and attacks the gaps. He's a space interpreter, as this says. He's a space invader. So Kai has a very, very similar quality in the sense that he does not occupy these spaces. He arrives into these spaces. He goes into these spaces. So I think, and the way, I think going back to the 4 or 5 preseason games we've watched, I'm pretty sure, and also Arteta pushing for the signing, I'm pretty sure he is very clear about how he wants to use Kai, right? So he has never used him even in the front three. Absolutely forget the fact that he's never used him as a central striker, because as a central striker, you're just occupying the centre halves or occupying the central regions. Whereas what Kai has done is he started from a deeper position where he's allowed the freedom to take up pockets in between defense and midfield, in between midfield and attack, and wherever there is space, try and invade that. So he could definitely play as, just going back, the advanced left aid, or if we just move forward in the slide, even occupy a more central position, or something on the as a right-sided 8 as well, even ahead of Odegaard. So if we remember, I think going back to the Barcelona preseason game, for example, even the game where he ended up looking like playing the Martinelli's role, it was Trossard who started on the left flank, and once Trossard vacated the space, it was Havertz who sort of occupied the space that was vacated. So this makes me think that, number one, Arteta really sees him as someone, as an evolution of the current team that he sees Kai coming into, and he has a very clear vision in terms of how he wants to use Kai. Now, we all know that Kai has taken the space of the role, the spot of Xhaka in this team, right? And Kai is a much, much better player in the offensive phase than Xhaka is. But one needs to also remember that as a coach, I think it's important to find the right balance in all phases of play when you're replacing someone. Sure. I mean, even going back last season, Xhaka had his best offensive season that he's ever had in his career. I think about 30 to 40% of his entire career output came last season. Sure, Xhaka, I mean, Havertz has more strings to his bow in terms of heading, in terms of just, carrying the ball and so on. But then you need somebody who plays instead of Xhaka to cover for him in all phases of play. It's not just the offensive phase, right? So, for instance, yes, Zinchenko inverts while we have settled possession, but there will be, even playing against lesser opposition, you can't be inverted all the time. There has to be parts of the game where the opposition has the ball. Even, lesser teams who have, let's say, a Michael Olise, for example, where Zinchenko has to drop into a traditional left-back role, where Havertz drops into, a deeper midfield role to cover for the defensive aspects of the game and also in the first phase of build-up, right? So just to go back to this sort of utility of Havertz, sure, he does take the role of Xhaka in the starting 11, but he does not play as a left 8. He might play as an advanced 8. He might play as a central striker, going back to how he presses, the spaces that he occupies when Arsenal have the ball, off the ball, the kind of runs that he makes and the spaces that he occupies, and even the way he presses when out of possession. But for that to happen, it's not just Havertz and the rest of the team being the same as what Arsenal were with Xhaka. It has to work alongside somebody else who can complement him in different phases of play. And this is something that we have to allow a certain adjustment period for the team to figure out how that could be. And this is where I feel that I had Havertz in my first block when the game launched, but I now looking back, though he has, a very productive role in terms of occupying and like getting into the box and so on, I do feel that there should be other things that needs to happen for Arteta to find a balance to make Havertz play as that lefty.
Sanki, do you think Havertz is an FPL option at all?
For me, I was thinking about it yesterday night, and I feel Havertz is a FPL asset who will be either he'll be having top ceiling, it might even be greater than Martinelli, or his floor will be lower than Partey when it comes to FPL, right? So he can be that kind of asset. For it to work, it will have to completely work. It will have to 100% work, right? But I also feel while we are talking about Havertz as a FPL asset, there's going to be a lot of impact in and around the ecosystem from a FPL point of view, right? If Havertz starts taking those runs, that really impedes Martinelli ability to get inside, right? So while I'm really, really, gung-ho about Martinelli as an FPL asset, I also want to see how does it impact him? Because we have seen them play, say, 45 minutes, and we have seen Martinelli drop deep, help Havertz take those central runs. But at the end of the day, his core strengths, like Achu said, is about running into spaces, right? About utilizing spaces. And if he wants to utilize that space as a second striker, I think it'll have some impact on Martinelli, which we are yet to see. Maybe Martinelli's assist will increase, but at the end of the day, there will be some impact because that space will now be taken by Havertz, right? Second, for Havertz to work, we will definitely need Timber, because I don't think we can have an inverted fullback in that area, right? We'll need a wide overlap guy, physical guy who can take care of all that space which has been vacated by Havertz going and trying to score or even create opportunities. But one thing that it might have some positive impact on, which I don't think a lot of people are thinking about, is Gabriel Jesus, right? Now, people talk a lot about Gabriel Jesus underperforming his stats, right? Not converting enough, or even Eddie and Nketiah. But at the end of the day, one thing I've always seen Gabriel Jesus do is he takes a lot of low quality shots, or you can say it's high quality just because he's closer to the goal, but it's always very, crowded out. He always attracts a lot of crowd. And when he tries to score, it's through that crowd, right? I was checking out his stats just to see whether that thought is correct or not. He has 27% of his shots, total shots taken, blocked. Take any traditional striker, right? It's never. So I was looking at Haaland, he has like 13%. Most of the strikers, it's less than 20%, right? The best thing about Kai is because last season, Jesus was the only person who was controlling that central area for us. He was always, crowded out by the two center backs who used to try and close him down. The best thing about Kai is I think that one center back now has to run with Kai, right? Has to track his runs. And that I feel is once Jesus is back, I want to see that relationship because I feel somehow it will really positively impact Jesus. And there's a strong possibility that those blocked shots now starts becoming shot and target, right? And then at the end of the day, you hope that the striker, or you expect the striker to eventually find his way into goals, right? So there is going to be a lot of impact from an FPL point of view into Arsenal assets. And that again brings us to the core theme of us. There's a lot of unpredictability about us. While there's a lot of excitement about us, pure FPL wise, it also means a bit of unpredictability because we don't know what exactly happens.
Right. Let's get into the FPL nitty-gritties now. And before that, I want to thank you guys for all the insight you provided so far. I'm glad our audience is getting a taste of what we get weekly on our Discord rather. Thanks for that. And let's start with the first question. I think that's from everyone's mind. Who is the Jesus replacement in our squad? Who is the second attacker? Pretty much we've all got Saka. Who do you think is the second best Arsenal attacker to get FPL wise? I'll come to you first, Suresh.
So interesting. Okay. So I think Saka is stand out the best Arsenal asset out there. I mean, just the way he's ended the season, gone away with England, got a hat-trick, come back to preseason, he looks so much stronger and sharper. And I think he's just a cut above, everyone else. Somebody else who's been, who started the season really strong is Odegaard in terms of just being the best player or the best couple of players on the pitch. But I definitely see him playing a more withdrawn role and therefore not being as much of a goal threat that he was last season. So I'd say that Saka is number one. And with Eddie coming in, I think he becomes a much more central attacking asset. And him and other people around him, as a result of the way Eddie plays, Eddie is just not as good as Jesus in terms of pressing from the front, right? And this is not just the physical effort involved, it's about anticipating, knowing how to cut off passing lanes, and just so many other things that involve that Jesus does so well. And as a result of Eddie being that guy, I think the rest of the team has to have a lower set point, have a deeper set point in terms of their average positions will have to be deeper and their defensive roles have to be a little more involved compared to when they play against, they play with a Jesus, right? So I'd say that everybody else becomes a worse attacking option with Eddie on the pitch. The only other attacking option that sort of comes into play with Eddie is one of the advanced eights, because Eddie occupies and stretches defenses back and pushes them back. And that sort of creates a gap between the defensive and the midfield line and sort of opens out pockets for an Odegaard or the left eight to occupy. So I think that is the only other position which might come into play. But I definitely think the others, I mean, have a much lesser ceiling as a result of playing with Eddie. But just as a player, I think I think Arsenal's ceiling reduces with Eddie on the pitch, though his own output is much better because he's occupying central areas. And I think, therefore, I would go against triple Arsenal attack.
No, I'm
now
talking.
that we have the Jesus news.
That's a bit. I'm talking more about the double Arsenal attack. So you feel Nketiah is more likely to start up top now, game week 1?
So my top picks would be Saka, Eddie, and as an outside shot, I'd say Trossard to start the season.
That's very interesting because I've got Martinelli in my squad right now. Let's talk a bit more about him. Sanki, what do you think of a Martinelli pick?
I also have Martinelli in my team, right? I think I'm waiting to see the Community Shield match where it plays out. The better thing about Jesus injury is it makes me a bit more comfortable about Martinelli because I think it's a strong probability that Trossard takes that role, especially because Eddie played a lot of minutes in the last match. I'm expecting Trossard to pick up that role in the Community Shield match, and if he does, I think there will be a repeat of the same in game week 1. Right?
So it's performance dependent. You expect Trossard to start, and if he plays well, he'll most likely start against Forest as well.
Correct.
Fair enough. So, but in terms of minutes right now, this whole thing now with players, now we expect the games to go to 100, 101st minutes and all that stuff. What do you think the substitutions in terms of the team are going to be? Like, you think Odegaard is probably the safest X minutes pick? I don't see him playing, getting subbed off early, right? But I think that's always going to be a concern with Martinelli, Trossard and Nketiah. But is Trossard an FPL option at all?
He is if he starts. If he starts, and we know that he starts, I think is a very exciting option. The only issue is it's not for a long time, right? He's not a long-term pick for you because you know Jesus is going to come back, I think, game week 3 to game week 5, right? Which we still don't have a lot of news. We have got conflicting news now. I read online that there's an opportunity for Jesus to come back to our squad in game week 2. At the same time, there is some news report saying that it might take him up to game week 4. I mean, Arsenal would ideally see out that first international break and then bring Jesus back, right? So there's a lot of conflicting news there, but I think Trossard is a very, very exciting Arsenal pick. If it was the mid of the season, I would have definitely gone there, right? Because it's the start of the season, right? And I'm trying to learn the lessons from last time. I feel a bit more, cautious about going for him. I am more comfortable going for players like Saka and Martinelli because even if Martinelli does not start, he'll play 30 minutes in one match. I don't expect him to get benched regularly. The only reason I feel there's a chance that Martinelli might not start is he's not played a lot of preseason minutes. He's also coming back from injury, right? It's something we have to remember. He missed the end of last season and he's been carefully played. I think he's played mostly 45 to 60 minutes at max in all the preseason matches. So there's a chance that he again gets a slow route back into the team, right? So that is something we have to look at.
Because the thing with Trossard is when he's hot, he's hot. And from what I've seen, he's had a good preseason and he's looked impressive. So I do think he's worth it as a differential pick. And I personally, as an outsider, if I was to guess, I think Trossard naturally makes a team around him better. And Nketiah is sort of the guy you sub on. And I think behind tired legs, he's the guy who'll be making more of the runs in behind. Things like that. But the thing you make a point about Martinelli's injury or his minutes, that's a really good thing to mention because we have to keep in mind now X minutes is a big thing with the Arsenal attack. So Sanki, for you, the second best Arsenal attacker is who?
Currently, I'm still on Martinelli, but if minutes continue to be a concern, I might take that Kai punt. It's because again, I think LR keeps infecting us with that virus. But again, it's that one ceiling move that you want to pick up, right? Because if it works really well. And the fact that we first 2 fixtures for us at home is a bit easier. I feel it's a reasonable punt to make.
Achu, would you still want to punt on Nketiah if he doesn't start in the Shield?
I think the Shield. I mean, to be honest, I think we know what we know. We don't know what we don't know, right? So I think with just the way the first few fixtures are, I think it's unlikely we see Partey and Rice as a midfield pivot. And I think we need someone more progressive. Therefore, if Rice is not playing the left 8, the only other person who's played the left 8 is Trossard or Kai, who started as an 8 but moved into the left flank, right? So if Trossard is required in the middle phase of play or in the first phase of play to build up, you only have Eddie playing the number 9 because there's nobody else. Balogun is out training on his own. So this is why I find that I think, I think Trossard is a better bet to start the season just because of the fixtures to begin with, and therefore, him having a bigger chance of starting as an 8. And therefore, even if, against City, it's you could have Trossard as the lone striker or the false 9 linking players and have Rice and Partey playing. But then it's an adjustment period where even after the first couple of games, I don't think we really know a first settled 11 for Arteta. So I think just to start the season off, I'd still go Saka. Of course, Saka, Odegaard are just in terms of exponents, superior. I'd say Saka is a better FPL asset and definitely stands out as number 1. And even if I don't see Eddie start the Community Shield, I'd say he's number 2.
That's very interesting. So you're not very bullish on Martinelli at all.
No. If Jesus was playing, I absolutely would go Martinelli in a jiffy, because I think Martinelli, that's the money position, right? Along with Havertz, in terms of, I think this is where Havertz comes in. This is where I think Havertz has a role to play, because I think the way Arsenal set up, we don't have a player who scores 25, 30 goals, right? And he's one of those players who can chip in with 10 goals, 10 plus goals, 15 goals a season, and therefore increase the overall output of the attack. And I think had Jesus been there, I'd definitely have gone perhaps Martinelli and even Havertz in terms of being the most productive positions on the pitch. But I think having Eddie, the assumption of Eddie starting, changes that completely. And with Trossard having to play against a weaker opposition, which is what we have in the first 3 games, makes me want to go Eddie after Saka.
What is Eddie's FPL price? I'm sorry for my poor research, but I really haven't considered.
5.5.
Oh,
5.5 million forward.
That is a really, really low price. That's pretty much like you said, the Joao Pedro price. I'm sure Ella is all excited right now. But let's talk a little bit on Odegaard, because there's the scout forums, etc., were still quite keen on him. I think you mentioned, Achu, that you don't see him getting forward as much. Do you agree, Sankhi? Is Odegaard completely not an FPL option?
I don't agree that he's not an FPL option. I think he's a lower ceiling option to begin with, right? He's going to play deeper for sure. This is something that we have seen across the preseason. So I'm fairly confident that remains true, but it also increases his assist ability, because now he has more runners into the box, right? And I don't know whether he'll be able to replicate that, goal scoring form, because he took a lot of his shots outside the box and he still managed to convert him. I think he overperformed his XG by 5%.
Him and Saka both, overperformed massively.
Yeah. So it's fairly difficult to, trust Odegaard to hit the same heights again. But he's fairly safe pick, because we are talking about, both Saka and Odegaard are going to be the guys who are going to play 90-95 minutes at home, right? I don't expect us to score 5 goals, but I do expect us to hit that 2 or 3 goal mark. And ideally, these are the guys who are going to get involved, right? So he might be a safe guy to start with, right? Because the experts are there. And then once you're more confident about the likes of Martinelli, Eddie, or Trossard, right? Maybe you take that seemingly sideways move, but maybe much, much higher ceiling move.
Yeah. From this entire conversation, I've suddenly become a lot more bullish on Trossard, especially if he does start this Sunday, right? Because the way I see it, maybe he starts alongside Martinelli, Martinelli gets subbed off and Ketia comes out, then Trossard goes wide. In terms of minutes, potential, I quite like the options there. And again, it's a short-term pick, like you said. You can always move off him to a Chelsea asset or whoever the midfielder emerges by game week 3 or 4. So
Zoff says a Chelsea asset. It made me smile.
Yeah, absolutely, buddy. The run is coming. You got to play the fixtures. And I'm actually quite optimistic after what I've seen. But let's not digress with that over here. So we've covered the attack pretty comprehensively now. Let's move a little bit towards the defense. And in particular at centre-back now, I think Gabriel is very much a locked-in pick, with most people opting out of triple Arsenal attack. There's been some debate, some people saying that Saliba is possibly more nailed on, Gabriel might get rotated. Where do you stand on, Sankhi? Do you expect Gabriel to miss the odd game when the UCL comes around?
No. I think he comes with his some mistakes for sure. But I think he's been a warrior for us. He had the second highest minutes for us last season after Ramsdale. And he's been a rock for us, and Arteta really trusts him. I don't expect Cure to take his role so soon, right? I think it's too much of a worry. It's not something that will happen so soon, right? At least, but at the same time, I'm not as bullish about Arsenal defense as people have been, right? Because having seen a lot of preseason matches, like I was talking about, there's a lot of adjustments that this team is going through, and more than attack, I think it is affecting our defense. There is some odd goal which we are going to concede here and there. And people are looking at the first 2, 3 fixtures and thinking, hey, there are clean sheets there. But let me remind you guys, we were the best away squad when it comes to defense last season. But when it came to home, I think we considered way more goals.
But was that an anomaly? Because the statistical numbers were quite similar, right? You'd concede the odd shot. You'd see Douglas Luiz, a corner where Ramsdale got fouled. I was a Ramsdale owner, so that one really hurt. I remember that quite well early on. Do you think that was just something that abnormal, or just something that we should expect to correct? Because I saw them at home. They would just completely pulverize teams, just concede the odd goal, mostly when they're 3-0 up, 4-0 up, often at those times.
I think we took a lot of opportunities, we took a lot of chances, created a lot more overloads, and that always left us up with a bit more of risk compared to away games. And that's why away games we were sharper. We always held down defenses. At the same time, obviously, we should not have considered the amount of goals we scored. And I think one player we have not yet spoken about is a player called David Raya, right? And if that person comes in, which is looking more and more likely with every day, right? In 2 to 3 weeks, that entire situation about Arsenal defense changes, because he comes in with a lot. It's fairly similar to Ramsdale, but today, if you ask me today who's a better keeper, I think it's David Raya, hands down. And I do expect him to take that role 4 matches down the line, because he's coming in late. So I know it will take a bit of time. But say post first international break, our goalkeepers should ideally change, and that would mean that I'm much more confident about our defense than ideally for the first 3, 4 matches, right? And that's the reason I'm not touching Arsenal defense myself. I'm either 2 attackers or Saka, because Jesus is now out. But even though I have that opportunity, I'm staying out of it for the time.
That's interesting. Achu, do you think Gabriel's goal threat is overrated?
No, I think it's underrated. Because he had the highest XG of all defenders last season. He had 5+ XG last season. He scored 3 goals. And I think this season, if anything, with more options on the ball, I think Arsenal are expected to have more of the possession and therefore translate into more set piece opportunities. So I think, yes, he's as a player, I think he's not had like a great time. He's had a mistake in him with the United friendly where he sort of let Sancho through and so on. But I think as an FPL option, he's still been getting header chances throughout preseason, as he's had at the close season that just we just saw. So yes, Saliba is the better player. I think Gabriel is definitely the better FPL asset. And just to go back to the point, I think last season it was a bit of happenstance that the away clean sheets far outnumbered the home clean sheets. To be totally honest, and I do think that given the way Zinchenko's still not started to train, and Jesus sort of being an issue, there is one option we haven't considered, which is we haven't discussed, which is you can maybe start with 2 Arsenal assets and then see who sort of takes on a more regular role and what happens. But I definitely think Gabriel at 5 million, I think is there's worse places that you can go.
Talking about the fullbacks, Ben White and Timber.
So just on that point, that I think because Zinchenko hasn't started to train, I think Timber will definitely start the season. So that I would say, and I think just in terms of the defense, in terms of the overall options, I'd say that Ramsdale is less of an option, not because I think he's an X-minus risk with Raya coming in or anything. I still think Ramsdale will continue to be number one. And perhaps, maybe there's nothing to worry about in terms of at least pre-wildcard, right? Making Raya number one before that. But I just think there are other options with a higher ceiling in terms of Onana and in terms of potential for the high double-digit score and so on. I think Timber, without Zinchenko, has that ceiling. So I'd rather, in terms of my defensive options, I'd say Gabriel is definitely number one. Saliba is number two just because of X minutes. And I'd say Timber is number three ahead of Ramsdale just because of his bonus potential. Because he'll get the passes in, he'll probably have the chance to get an assist. And overall, I think, Arsenal defense is okay. I'd back for that.
In terms of defender rankings, you have to pick Sankey. You would agree with that? Gabriel is the one to pick?
Yeah, because even though I don't think he's a great header of the ball, but he's the guy who's going to end up with those opportunities, right? And I think it's a famous quote of the Wire, right? You put yourself in positions where you get lucky, right? And Gabriel is such a pick. But if I don't remember that Timber's price, it might be 0.5 million cheaper, right? If he's the guy who's 0.5 million cheaper, I think he's not a bad pick either. I expect him to be as nailed for the first 4-5 weeks, given the fact that Zinchenko is yet to have a preseason with us. And that Ben White and Timber duo, I expect them to continue a bit longer if it starts working. So far, it looks like it will work really, really well.
Fantastic, guys. That was a great discussion. You had me thinking now on Martinelli. I was very set. I thought Martinelli is pretty much nailed on in my squad. Now I'm scratching my head now. I'm considering both Trossard and Nketiah. Well, honestly, Trossard a bit more. Nketiah, I think probably because I like Watkins in that spot. Would you be comfortable picking Nketiah over Watkins, Achu?
I think
Shield dependent, right? I guess it would be a little bit on the, if you see him start in the Shield, probably more so.
No. I'd say that because, let me put it this way, because I think Diaby is an option, I'd still go, just in terms of X minutes, of course, Watkins is like way ahead. But just because of the options that you have, I'd say Nketiah should be up there. Because you're buying those fixtures as well in the first three. And if you're getting a starting Arsenal striker, getting the bulk of the XG, you want to put yourself there, in terms of getting those hauls. So I'd say definitely Eddie should be in the conversation there.
Any chance of Trossard making either of your squads if he starts in the Shield? And let's say he scores, or at least looks good. Do you think he would make either of your teams?
I've been tinkering with that possibility, right? To your first question, Zoff, I think there's a good chance we can get Eddie as a third striker rather than the second one, because we can always downgrade Martinelli to a 6.5 million midfielder, right? And there are plenty, right? So that is something that is in my mind. If I'm confident that Eddie starts, I'll go for that additional forward just to see, because if he plays, we know he's the guy with the chances, right? So there's a strong possibility that he converts as well. We go with that. But of course, with Trossard, the only issue is you have to sacrifice another midfielder. Either you sacrifice Martinelli, then it's like you feel a little bad, but it's okay. But other than that, you have to sacrifice one of the likes of, Bruno, Rashford, those shoe-shot guys, which I don't want to do.
That's probably not if you would be making, because I'm pretty locked in on Saka and Gabriel. It's just the third spot. I'm a bit wavering. I was pretty set on Martinelli, but now I'm going to be scratching my head. I'm going to be watching the Shield very closely. Thank you, guys. That was a fantastic discussion. We really appreciated having you guys on. You're such natural podcasters. You guys were a bit nervous coming on, but that entire conversation just flew by. And in fact, Sankalp, you also appear on another pod. Please tell us about that.
Yeah, so this is the second season for us. It's called the Gameweek Navigators. We started it last season. We are growing a bit more now. It's just an opportunity for us to talk about the game that we love, right? These are like-minded people across continents who just try to talk a bit more. We have added fans of different clubs so that we have a bit more representation. We have a Newcastle guy as well, right? Showing the change in time. So yeah, in case you guys want to listen to me a bit, talk a bit more about Arsenal and other clubs, please, look at the podcast Gameweek Navigators and do give us a like and a follow.
Fantastic. Any last word, guys, before we sign out?
Cheers, guys. It's been a great pre-season, and bring on the new season.
Fantastic. Once again, guys, we have great members like this on our Discord. Do join. You can sign up on Patreon or on YouTube. We look forward to seeing you on there. Thank you once again. I really enjoyed that chat. I feel totally clued in now, and I'm really looking forward to the Shield. Appreciate it, and I hope to have you guys on more often.
Thanks, Ralph.